Got it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, fantastic. Right, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. It's a beautiful day where I am outside. So the fact that you're just here wanting to learn more and share a bit of knowledge is greatly welcomed. And to those who are returners, it's always lovely to see and hear your voices again. And for everybody who's new, it's just really great to have you here. As you know, we are recording the session, which was noted as well on the meetup. So please do be conscious of that whilst we're talking about things, but please feel free to open and share about your different experiences as well. Oh, goodness me, sorry about that, getting click happy again. Like I was saying, you know, thank you. I know that we say this a lot, but we do really appreciate your time. Like, everybody's time is so precious. We spend so much time on Zoom that, you know, just to be together tonight is just really really nice to be able to share this experience together. So thank you. In terms of housekeeping, fire exits are where you know them. So for me, it's basically out this door and just keep on going, run as fast as I can. But please don't follow me because I don't know your layout of your house or wherever you are. So please be conscious of that. Anything else? If you want to ask questions or open the chat, please pop things in the chat. And Kate, our wonderful guest today, we'll be able to kind of see those, and obviously Ines and I can call some things out as well. And then I think that would be great. Like I say, we're recording, we talked about that. Our time box for today is an hour and a half. So we will be finishing in an hour and 20 minutes now. So an hour and 20 minutes. And we love a bit of collaboration. So like I was saying before, like, please utilize the chat that we've got there. So cool. So as you guys know, for all the returners, for all the returners in the crowd, you know that we love the game rock, paper, scissors. It's fantastic because it's universal. Everybody knows how to play. Pretty much, I've just put that statement out there. If you don't know how to play, that's okay. It's a pretty simple game. You basically go for rock, paper, scissors, and usually it's kind of a bit of a challenge, but today we're going to use it to answer some questions. So if you don't mind to be on camera, feel free to switch your camera on, and I would love to see your best rock. So show me your best rock. Yes, we've got some lovely rocks out there. Lenny, scissors, show me your scissors. Yes, Jed, love it. Lovely. Okay, so we've all had good days. We haven't got any of these today, which is quite nice. Very nice. And lastly, show me your paper. Can we all see what a paper looks like? Every time, Ines, it makes me laugh. Yes. Lovely. Okay, right. So there is just 3 questions then that we have. So the first question is this. Conflict resolution is discussed within our organisation openly. Feel free to show me or to pop it in the chat. Rock, paper, or scissors? No, we have no, we have a maybe. What have we got in the chat? I can't see in the chat.
Someone's talking about crisps, which has made me very, very envious.
Sometimes maybe. Crisps, yes, big fan over here. It's always a treat after the meetup for us. So second question then. That's so strange. I don't know what's happened to my screen, but anyway, we'll move on. I'm currently experiencing conflict within my team. Okay. And lastly, are you ready for this? I have been told I create conflict within the team. Laughing face. No. Okay. Right, so now we are all ready. Our hands are lovely and warm, and we all know how to play rock, paper, scissors. Then let's just continue. So the quality of our lives depends not on whether we have conflicts, but on how we respond to them. And I'm really hoping that from Kate and your wonderful experience that you've got and that you bring us tonight, you'll be able to sort of highlight and let us absorb some of that knowledge. So after much popular demand for more information and more knowledge and sharing on conflict resolution, I would love to welcome you, Kate Maddison-Greenwell, who's with us tonight. So over to you, Kate.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So am I okay to share my screen?
You are indeed, yes, go for it.
Lovely. Let's just do that awkward bit then where we move over and you can tell me whether I've got the right screen in place. I'm not sharing all of my other dark secrets. Brilliant. Thank you, Ines. Thank you. So yes, welcome to conflict resolution that I'm going to be delivering for you today. I think as Helen said, if you've got any questions, then do pop it into the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on it. If it's relevant as we go along, I'll try and weave it in. If not, then I can always answer them at the end. So let's begin. So I think the first thing that I need to point out right at the very beginning is that I've been contacted by a couple of people. I don't know whether they're on today, but a couple of people that have signed up to this. And both of them said that the screen that Helen and Ines shared, the sort of the screen grab that's on display now, really reminded them of an old BBC screen ident. So I don't know whether you'll know, the ones of you that are in the UK, whether you'll recognise it. I think it's the smile and it's the pose. But it reminded them a bit of this. And I absolutely howled because it took me back many years. So yeah, I think I can see the semblance. I think it's in the grin, I think. So yeah, I recognise that and we'll move on quickly. So the first thing that I'll do is just tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been in HR now for 23 plus years. It will always be 23 years, no matter how old I get and how experienced I get. I've decided that that's the age that I'm going to use. And I've always kind of felt, working in HR, I've always had this kind of internal scream of there must be a better way. And I was finding that more and more responsibilities were coming to HR under the tag of people. But of course, you know, everything's people. People is at the heart of everything we do. And I was finding that HR was becoming more and more transactional with admin, following processes and processing data and reporting and L&D and all of these things. And I found that whenever there was a problem, HR were often called on to fix it. And I noticed that kind of the majority of companies had a parent-child approach where the senior leadership team made all the difficult decisions and the middle management executed them and everyone else followed orders through their long list of duties on their job description. And that's kind of typical of a lot of companies, and that's definitely typical of HR. And I find that not enough attention was being paid to the way in which we work and the framework with which we communicate and we collaborate and we improve. And we were kind of doing the same thing over and over. And it's a big issue within HR. And then one day I overheard my then boyfriend, now current husband, playing planning poker. And he sounded like he was having, you know, a real laugh. And this is back in the days before Zoom became fashionable. And I was like, you know, why is he having fun at work? What the hell is going on? This is not right. And he explained to me what it was about. He was saying that it was, you know, part of a process where the team were making decisions together on what they wanted to focus on, and that they were a self-organizing team. And I found out more about it, and it really got me hooked onto Agile. And I could see the benefits of bringing Agile into HR for HR to evolve and be able to support companies better in their response to change and being able to pivot and, you know, making employees the center of what they do. So I started using those methods with my team, and eventually I started my own business running courses and offering coaching and consultancy services for HR departments and leadership teams to change their culture and start using some of the Agile methodologies and mindsets. So that's a little bit about me, and you can see some of the companies that I've worked with and for on the screen. So before I go into conflict and kind of things that I've done, a little bit more about the theory of conflict, we'll just do a little welfare check and also test out something that I've incorporated into my chat today. So I like to do a check-in like this at the beginning of webinars, and I'm treating you to my personal favourite today, which is the Dave Grohl scale. So if you have a look at the slide and then pick the number that best represents how you feel today, and then on the next slide, you'll see a QR code, and you can hold up your phone camera and select the number and tell me about how you're feeling this evening. So have a quick look, pick the number that best represents your inner Dave Grohl, and we'll have a look and see how people are feeling this evening. So hopefully you've all got your number now. Look at him, isn't he a good looking man? Oh, there we go. So hold your camera up to the screen, and it should come up with an automatic link, and then you can just pick your number, and you can tell me how you're doing. And there is all the numbers there. I just have to scroll up and down. So it should come up automatically if it's all worked. Oh, a 9, very good. Have we got any others? Oh, sorry, apologies.
Would you mind going back to the last screen?
Absolutely,
for
yeah.
some reason I've forgotten much numbers.
Fine, that's fine. I'm loving that somebody's a 9 now. That's my favourite. And that's how I'm feeling today.
Thank you.
Sometimes in HR, I feel a bit of a 7 where I'm pointing at people. So I'll just go on to the next slide and see. Oh God, sorry about this. I'm getting trigger happy on my mouse. There we go. So it looks like people on the whole are feeling not too bad. A couple of people are feeling a bit pensive, which is absolutely fine. They might not know what they're in for today. Good. So if anybody is feeling perhaps a bit down or a bit sad, then I'm happy to stay on after this. And if somebody wants to talk to me about, a conflict that they're experiencing at the moment, that's absolutely fine. I've spoken to Helen and Ines, and we can keep that open. So if anybody is feeling a little bit low, that's fine if you want to have a chat afterwards. So let's crack on. Oh God, sorry, I don't know why my apologies. So our aims for today. So we're going to hopefully by the end of today understand a little bit more about the causes of conflict, what conflict can look like, what our role can be in conflict resolutions, and then a couple of techniques and a couple of things that I've implemented in my experience with working with teams. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what we recognise conflict as being. So we recognise conflict as a thing that remains unresolved for long periods of time and then becomes stuck at a high level of intensity and destructiveness. So these conflicts are generally based on differences in values or worldviews and involved non-negotiable issues. Disputes, on the other hand, are usually short-term conflicts that involve disagreements over a specific approach or an outcome or a solution. And as coaches, scrum masters and leaders and team members, sometimes we can often find ourselves having to mediate difficult conversations between team members. And many times those conversations can escalate beyond a friendly disagreement and can require us to help the team navigate to a resolution. So when we find those situations, we need to assess if what we're facing is a short-term dispute that we can help mediate, or a long-term conflict that is beyond our ability to intervene and should then be escalated to the leadership or somebody appropriate within the organisation. So for Agile teams, a conflict usually signals that its members are becoming invested in the team and are either driving a change that they would like to see, or they're raising an issue related to the behaviour or actions of other team members. So conflicts are great opportunities really to help the team mature and become more effective. But resolving a dispute is not really as simple as getting everybody to see the right solution or to agree on one of potentially many outcomes. So often when we recognise a conflict, the sides involved are already invested in a position and maybe in an emotionally charged state. So what we want to do is progress from a win-lose attitude to a solution-building mindset. So most potential conflicts start with discomfort. So how would we know if there was discomfort? Well, this is where the power of listening comes in, and it's through our eyes and through our ears. So it's usually things like rolling of eyes or arms folded, sighing, clipped answers possibly, silence, or things like requests for side conversations. You know, when somebody says, oh, can I have a chat with you about our meeting yesterday, or, you know, they want to catch up after a meeting. Again, not always a bad thing, but if it becomes a common issue or a common event, then it could become an issue. There may also be some historic feelings from previous involvement from members of the team. So let's give an example. So this is something that happened to somebody else. So I've disguised her to protect her identity. So let's call her Jen. So Jen is the new HRD for a HR director for a team that's working on a high profile service implementation. So she's got one team member called Frank that the others are getting quite frustrated with. So he doesn't flag impediments and he doesn't take accountability when he doesn't achieve at the end of the sprint. And this has been raised at the last 2 retros, which Jen wasn't involved in, but no improvement has been seen. So at the point that Jen took over, it had gone beyond discomfort and really into the incident stage. So sprint planning was being affected as the trust was breaking down and people weren't sure whether the goals were achievable and what have you. But there was one person in particular who was really quite incredibly het up about it. We'll call him Steve. He kept calling Frank out in the retros and was having several side conversations with the rest of the team. And there were also other side conversations about Steve's treatment of Frank. And if we look at this kind of sliding, this big slide that people can often go down, as you can see, if things aren't resolved at the initial stages, then it can sometimes slide into misunderstandings, tension, and then ultimately crisis. And that happens when rational perspective goes down and emotional involvement becomes increases. So I don't know whether anybody's realised, but it's actually me that's in disguise there. This is something that happened to me when I took over as a HRD for a new team. So there's different, there's a sliding scale really with conflict. So the first one is that there can be a problem to solve. And this is where facts are used. And in this particular instance, the sprint goal had been missed twice. So that was a fact. We knew that. The next stage of a conflict is disagreement. So this is where conversations start to happen offline. It moves from specific to general. Facts are perhaps less important than interpretation, which can cause confusion. So there were comments like, Frank isn't working as hard as the rest of us. So this is where I joined the team. And this is the stage where most of the team were, but not Steve. Steve was firmly in the contest stage. And that is where the aim is to win. And something that you might want to look up is that there's some videos on YouTube, which is the Who is Right game by Marshall Rosenberg. And it discusses and shows things, and has role plays of people that are having a discussion where one party stops listening while the other party is speaking. And the reason that they stop listening is because they're preparing their argument in their head so that they can win. And they have an image of the enemy in front of them. And they use terminology like you always or you never. And that's where that was where I came in on this particular example. The other stage is, moving on from that, is crusade. And that's where people think others won't change. So they don't see a resolution. They only see us and them, you or me, and someone has to leave. Sometimes there's an attack on ideology or principles, and kind of righteous behaviour starts coming out. So it's things like, I would never do that, or I would always do this, or that's not the right thing to do. And that's where crusade, that's the stage of crusade. And then the last stage, and you might have to listen carefully, I've put a little sound effect in here. There we go. So the last stage is the boom stage. Sometimes people call it the war stage, or crisis stage. And that's where there's a feeling that it's not enough that I win. Others have got to lose. And that's where you get to the stage of having to separate the team members, and there really isn't a constructive outcome that can be had. So as leaders or coaches or scrum masters or team members, we need to work hard to try not to get any further really than a disagreement. So there's different causes of conflict, and Gary Furlong and Moore have kind of done some great work on this, and Moore created a circle of conflict, and then Furlong has adapted that. And these are all different causes of conflict, which I'm going to take you through now. So we've got values, relationships, externals, external incidents and moods, structure, interests, and data. So if we have a look at the top ones, if we look at values, the values section of the circle really relates to the morals and beliefs and opinions of the person that is causing or adding to the central conflict. It's what tells the person what's right or wrong, who is good or evil, and what is just or unjust in the conflict. So to be sure, religious, spiritual, and cultural systems play an important role here, but so do the daily interactions at work and at home, like civility or loyalty or work ethic or any kind of home or work etiquette. So when these values collide against other people's values, the situation's quite fertile for a conflict, and often either causes a conflict or augments an existing conflict. So these values are quite deep-seated. So they almost always come with emotion and turmoil, which can then create a perfect storm for conflict narrative escalations. Then we have relationships. So this piece of the circle deals mostly with past negative experiences and are at the center or the cause of the conflict. So in other words, the person in conflict sees the conflict through the eyes of a past history rather than what's actually happening in the moment. So for Steve, he'd been made redundant before and was really paranoid that it would happen again if he wasn't successful. So another example that's often used when discussing things like conflict is, it might sound trivial, but another example might be where a work colleague might borrow office supplies from a person's desk, a stapler or something like that. And the person might tell the colleague not to borrow any further supplies, but then when a stapler is missing from that person's desk later on, they might automatically blow up at the colleague without actually finding out if the missing stapler was the doing of that colleague. So in many cases, the person in conflict might even retaliate with similar actions, or might form a stereotype of that person, or might limit or cease all communication with that person. So in extreme cases, in an unrelated situation, the person might even treat people of a similar personality or gender or race, to name a few, in the same manner, even though that person has never wronged them or might not even know them. So in psychology, they call that transference. So the other part of the circle is externals or moods. So this relates to indirect factors that could contribute to conflict situation or narrative. So it can be as simple as someone, on the way into work, someone might cut someone off in traffic, and then they're so upset when they come to work, they might lash out at their colleagues. Or it could be as complex as perhaps labour disputes that are taking place during COVID, in which two sides become animated and unreasonable over perhaps a very basic term in their contract. So sometimes the externals and moods can fuel the fire for conflict, and sometimes they're kind of sitting in the background as another layer to that conflict. So as above with transference, the person in conflict might take out their emotions on a colleague because the person was treated badly by a boss, or so now they're in a management position, they treat the person badly because the person reminded them of themselves perhaps at the start of their career, and that treatment's a form of counter-transference. So those are at the top of the circle. Then at the bottom, we have data, interests, and structure. So data involves information. So it could be incorrect information, different information, incomplete information, and it's a key component of the conflict situation. So in other words, so data becomes problematic when it's, quite clearly wrong, perhaps it's full of mistakes or something. It can also be problematic if it doesn't contain all of the facts. So if somebody hasn't done due diligence, or when a person has more information than the other person, so perhaps a power imbalance. And related to the keeping of data is the interpretation of that information, which can play a critical role in conflict, as one person's understanding of the facts might not match another person's way of interpreting what is being presented to both. So it's important to remember that each party believes vehemently that their interpretation of the data is the correct version, and probably the only version, and each can become quite firmly entrenched in that belief. So I don't know whether you've seen the image of two people standing at either side of a 9 or a 6. One person sees a 9 and the other person sees a 6. They're both right, but they're seeing it in completely different ways. So with interests, they're the why in any problem. So most people will tell you what they want, which is what we call their position. And interests are kind of the motivation for action. So they are what's behind the position, so the real need or desire of the person. So examples here are perceived or actual competition over interests. So that means you're both actually competing for the same thing. Are you both competing for the same thing? Or do you just think you are, but deep down inside you really want something else? Or it could be an argument over what procedure to use or how to execute a task. Sometimes there's kind of deeper psychological differences, and those could be at the root of a problem. Really that's something that we should all be mindful of, that there could be something other that could be at the root of an issue. So with structure, it's important as it encompasses several types of situation in which conflict can occur and at times flourish. So these common structural problems are usually things like limited resources or authority problems, organizational structures. So limited resources, for example, can be a problem, as companies and departments or even teams within the same department can compete for the same resources. So that can become a point of conflict. Authority problems can be a source of conflict, as they occur when someone's tasked with resolving a situation, they don't have the authority to do anything about it, given their work status or perceived work status. And then with organizational issues, that can occur when groups of people work together, but they don't necessarily share the same goals, objectives, or visions. So what we've learned from Moore and from Furlong is that those are the causes of conflict. But Furlong actually maintains that straying into the drivers at the top half of the conflict will probably intensify the conflict, because they're people's values, it's things that people hold very dearly to them in terms of their relationships and their past experiences. And also externals, we can't control what's happened to somebody outside of the workplace, or, whether they're having a bad day or an off day or what have you, we can't control that. So if we want to resolve the conflict, then the conversation should really be focused on areas over which the parties and ourselves have some control. So those are the ones at the bottom. So if we think about the example that I was giving you in terms of facts, so there were several facts that I had to take into consideration. So it was a fact that there wasn't any kind of conflict resolution process in place. It was a fact that Frank wasn't partaking fully in things like the estimation or the value stages properly. He just went in the middle always. He didn't raise blockers, and he didn't partake fully in retros either. It was also a fact or something to take into consideration that Steve had been a leader in a previous role before he was made redundant, and that he'd also come from a control and command environment previously. It was also true that Frank hadn't been spoken to about the issues. Nobody had actually spoken to him and pointed them out or asked him, you know, what was what. And it was also the case that the data was correct. So those were the facts that I was having to deal with there. So if we move on here, so if people want to take themselves off mute at this time, that's absolutely fine. So if we look at how to resolve this, where would we place Steve and Frank and my predecessor on this scale? What do we think about where we would put Steve? Where would Steve be on this scale here? And you can pop it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just shout it out. That's absolutely fine. Thank you for complimenting my sound effect, by the way. Took me a while to find it. So what are we saying? So Steve was the chap who was calling Frank out and was having the side conversations and generally making people a little bit miserable with his constant directness. Where would we put him on this?
I would go, please.
Be more towards the compete corner.
Yeah. Definitely. So he was on, you know, he was competing, and he was certainly looking out for his own interests. He was wanting to win. You know, he was kind of moving into the contest stage, and so he was looking out for his own interests there. Where would we put Frank on this? So Frank was the chap that was, you know, keeping his head down really. He was missing the deadlines and the sprint goals. He wasn't really partaking in the retrospectives. So we've got some that's coming in the chat. So it looks like, yeah, so it looks like a void. Which is right. You know, he, in terms of trying to resolve this conflict, what he was doing was avoiding it altogether. And, you know, that having those two people that are at the opposite end doesn't make for a happy environment. So in terms of my predecessor, when I came in, where do you think the predecessor would be on this scale? So the outgoing HRD hadn't raised the issues with Steve or with Frank, and they were, you know, whether it was because they were leaving, whether it was because that was their style, where do you think they might have been here? Apologies, I keep looking down. That's where the chat is on my phone. I'm just having a quick look. I'm not going to sleep. It's fine. I'm just looking down. So yeah. So you're absolutely right. So people have put avoid and accommodate, and it's kind of both. So they're avoiding it because they're not bringing it into fruition, but they're also accommodating. They're accommodating the behaviour, both of Steve and Frank. They're really, they're not really putting any kind of onus or impetus on trying to resolve the conflict for the welfare of both Steve and Frank and the rest of the team. So really their kind of style was to accommodate what was going on. So where do you think we would need to be in order to resolve this kind of conflict? What would be a good place to be? Yeah, absolutely. So people are talking on the chat about collaboration and compromise. And sometimes you can go straight to a compromise situation, but other times you have to collaborate first. And you have to get into the mindset of understanding both parties in order to be able to make that compromise without people feeling that they've won or without people feeling that they've lost. So then we need to look at the key to keeping conflict at a 1 or a 2. So this is at the problem solving or the disagreement part of conflict. So conflicts can be opportunities. So conflicts inside a team are a natural consequence of having a group of people that are working closely together. So they can be a great opportunity to help the team mature and grow on their path to high performance. So as coaches or leaders, we can use these situations as teachable moments that drive the team to collaborate and become better at dealing with these kind of difficult conversations. So we need to be mindful of the type and the level of difficulty of the conflict before we decide to step in and try to mediate a solution. So the dispute resolution techniques that we're talking about today can be really useful in helping you navigate these difficult conversations. So I usually recommend that coaches or leaders start practicing those techniques on smaller problems so that they're comfortable using them when they need to then use them on a truly difficult dispute. So one of the things that I do with my teams is I start to build psychological safety. And I could do that in a big way or a small way, in a short-term way or a longer-term way. But either way, the first thing that I do with my teams is I agree the terms of engagement at a project start or a formation of a team. And I reinforce that with team members that may be coming in. And we have an open discussion. So for myself, I normally do it on a Miro board or mural or any kind of virtual whiteboard where we get the team together and we talk about how we want to behave and what we will do if things go wrong or if conflict arises. So I ask lots of different questions. But before I do that, I reassure them that conflict is going to happen and it's expected and it's actually planned for. We might not know what conflict is going to be, but we know that it's going to happen because we're all human beings. We're all working on, on the same goal. And of course, one of the Agile principles is believing that everybody's doing their best. So if we can cement that right at the beginning and expect that there will be challenge and talk about how we're going to address that when it happens, then it makes conflict a lot easier to resolve at a later stage because you've got that line in the sand, you've got that agreement right at the beginning about how people are going to behave when it happens. So I ask the team things like, how would we resolve conflict? And I encourage people to share times when it's happened with them in the past, either successfully or unsuccessfully. And I take people through, through an activity in order to agree how we would resolve conflict in the future. And usually what people come up with is that they like to be spoken to, they like to be spoken to kindly, privately, if it's you know, kind of personality conflict, or that they will bring it up in retrospectives, and they will agree that that's okay and it's okay to be transparent and what have you. We also talk about our values, and I don't know about you guys, but we often put a value at the beginning of every sprint, and we change them each time so that we can really kind of focus on the different values. We talk about what's important and how we can make the team really powerful. And often having collaboration and knowing how to compromise is what makes a team move from good to great. And we talk about how we're going to work and how we can accommodate different styles. So there are people that are introverted, there are people that are extroverted, there are people that are very introverted, and there are people that are very extroverted. And there are people on all kinds of different spectrums and with lots of different experiences. So we need to talk about the practicalities of how things are going to work. So if we have flexibility within the team, are we going to rely more heavily on asynchronous styles of working, you know, through things like Miro or Kanban boards or what have you? Are we going to rely on that more in order to accommodate flexibility? And if so, when do we move from that to, you know, calling a meeting or having different conversations? So we talk about things like that. We talk about making decisions, you know, when is it appropriate for people to, you know, work autonomously, and the kind of decisions that are good for people to make themselves, or when it's good to bring things up as a team, and at what point it's good to do that. And we also focus on language. So that often comes with people being quite honest about what triggers them. So if there's particular language that people don't like, so I think I gave an example earlier of people that might say you never or you shouldn't. Sometimes that can make people quite defensive. So we can agree at the beginning that that's something that we will try our hardest not to use. And sometimes, you know, if there has been an issue where somebody like Frank hasn't done something, we should all agree up front that it's okay to hold each other to account. And, you know, by doing things like retrospectives and using kind language, we can talk about the impact that something has had to the team rather than somebody's personal contribution not being good enough, for example. And that's the start of building psychological safety. So the next thing I do with my teams is recognize what's conflict, what's a dispute, and reframe it. So sometimes I might ask myself these questions, or I might ask others in my quest to understand what's actually happening and getting to the bottom of an issue. So if I look at these questions, it's about really getting to the root cause. And if I find that I've got to the bottom of the root cause, I can establish whether it's a dispute that can be nipped in the bud, whether it's a raging conflict, and perhaps I don't know just how deep it goes. And that will help me to know how I can resolve it. Or escalate it if needs be. So I ask things like, you know, is it just about one specific thing, or is it a much broader issue? Are the parties personally invested in the outcome of the conflict? So if I think about Steve, you know, he was really invested in the outcome of the conflict, and he was certainly making quite personal judgments, both to Frank and with the rest of the team. But with Frank, it was harder to tell how invested he was, and whether he was making any kind of personal judgments, because there was silence really from his end. So that was harder to be able to come to that conclusion without actually asking him. But with Steve, you know, there were a couple of things that I knew straight away because he was voicing them. So I ask things like, you know, is there a power struggle, or is it that there's a mismatch or a misunderstanding of what it is that we're doing, bearing in mind that for this example that I'm giving you, I came in halfway through a particular project. It came across like a power struggle. That's certainly how it seemed to be. But actually, when I started asking questions, there was certainly a lot of emotions there from Steve's end initially. So that's the next stage that I would take in terms of building that psychological safety. Is it a conflict? Is it a dispute? Do I need to press the panic button? Is it something that can be resolved? How many people are involved in this? How many people is it impacting? And ultimately, is it taking us away from our goal? And therefore, do we need to rethink our sprint planning? Is it something that we need to make time for example? And also, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Are we actually going to resolve this, or do we need to, you know, do something a bit more quickly and more drastic if needs be? So as part of recognizing that conflict and disputes, and to maybe move it from a dispute or a conflict to a more solution-focused conversation, all of the parties need to feel heard and acknowledged. And I statements are really useful when a dispute is related perhaps to behaviours or to previous actions. So they provide the participants in a dispute with a powerful tool to fully express their point of view and their emotional perspective without offending or alienating the other parties. So appropriate I statements help all of the sides express their views and their emotional state honestly and clearly without forcing other parties to defend their positions. So you may have noticed in disputes or conflicts that you've been involved in or have witnessed that quite often it escalates when people start saying things like you. You know, sometimes it's partnered with a finger point, sometimes not, but it usually starts with a you did or you didn't. And that makes people quite defensive. So it's quite powerful to change that to an I. So when we state something as a fact, we create a win-loss situation, which, you know, where a disagreement is framed in terms of right or wrong. So if we get the parties to restate their position as an I statement, it helps them to take ownership of their position rather than seeing the situation as fixed and unchangeable. So it's quite an important shift in perception, and it will sort of open the door to the exploration of options which can lead to a satisfactory solution. So this is quite a good sort of template, if you like. So it's a good way to get the parties to re-express their position using an I statement to encourage them to use this that's on your screen now. So when a particular behaviour that's triggering the disagreement happens, I feel, and then what I would like is, you know, express an outcome rather than a behaviour. So to give an example, when you talk over me in meetings, I feel that you are disregarding my input, and what I would like is for the meeting to pause regularly so that I have the opportunity to give my thoughts. So with Steve and with Frank, I had to have separate conversations with each party. And with Steve, it was about listening to him and encouraging him to reframe it. With Frank, it was about giving him the tools to frame the problem he was having. So he felt quite overpowered by everybody on the team, and it was making him withdraw. So by getting him to talk about the kind of things that were making him withdraw by using I statements, it was a good way of understanding where he was coming from. So it's important at this point not to give solutions and really to acknowledge the feelings and clarify exactly what's happening and bringing up any constraints. So if we've moved the parties away from that win-loss mentality and really got to the root cause of what's causing the problem, and they've all had the opportunity to express and clarify their positions in a more positive and constructive way, we can then start to move the parties towards a solution building process. So the first step is to get all of the parties to look at the dispute in a different light. So rather than it being win-loss or right-wrong or we or they, we want to present the dispute as a common problem. So if the parties agree that all of their positions are inherently valid and not negate each other, they can start to see the dispute as something that affects all of them and the wider team. So from there, they can begin to collaborate on a solution that furthers the objectives of everybody that's involved, the rest of the team, me and them. So it's really important to be honest and transparent about the process. So if you inform the parties that you're going to attempt to re-express the dispute in a way that reflects everyone's needs and goals and perceptions, then neither party should feel that it's an attempt to diminish their point of view or to reposition the dispute to the advantage of the other side. So ideally, the parties will collaborate on reframing the dispute in a way that is more conducive to a solution building process. So when you're doing this, if you are, if you're the one that's responsible for resolving the conflict, or even if you're a team member, it's important to be neutral. And I do this by establishing a neutral stance. So it's quite a powerful tool when you're thinking about things like mediating or resolving a conflict. So what you need to do is make sure that you can participate fully in the conversation while still remaining detached from any kind of specific outcome or specific emotion. So by stepping into a neutral zone when you're having or preparing for a difficult conversation, you can gain awareness of the whole situation. So it lets you value equally all of the parties and honestly support them on moving the conversation forward. So if you separate yourself from your own points of view and preferences in order to build trust with the parties involved in the conversation, then you're much more likely to be successful. So by being in a neutral stance, you're avoiding the appearance of bias or favoritism towards one of the parties. And you can then have a preferred outcome, which will be to resolve the dispute while keeping the team in a healthy state. So how do I get myself into a neutral stance? So if you can develop a physical or a mental ritual that signals to your mind and to your body that you're entering into a neutral zone, then you're much more likely to get that neutral stance. So some people find it really useful to have a mantra that they can say to themselves before starting on these conversations. For me, I picture Switzerland. In my mind, I have Switzerland in my head, and that kind of triggers me to think neutrality. And if I do find myself thinking in a biased way, then I picture Switzerland. And, you know, to be sort of quite open and honest about it, I am somebody who is quite naturally extroverted. I'm also somebody that is really comfortable with flagging if I have an impediment. Or a blocker or something that's stopping me, and I'm somebody that is really comfortable with being transparent. But that comes from, you know, many years of making mistakes. It comes from many years of you know, failing at certain things and experiencing help when I get it. So I have often in the past found it really frustrating when somebody just withdraws and isn't as comfortable with that kind of level of transparency or that level of you know, putting yourself out there and opening yourself up to people. So that's something that I have a slight bias towards. So I need to remain neutral in order to you know, coax or coach somebody that is perhaps more likely to be introverted or less likely to be as open as I would prefer, or as I would act if I was in their shoes. Whatever your ritual is, it's really comfortable. Make sure it's really comfortable for you, and make that a ritual so that you can create a clear break between your regular mindset and your coaching or leadership position. So before starting the conversation, it's important to evaluate the situation and honestly acknowledge to yourself any existing bias, as we've just discussed. It is a really natural part of being a human. I haven't yet found anybody that has completely got rid of every single one of their biases and can completely remain neutral and unemotive all the time. If I am presented with that person, or if you know a person like that, I'd love to meet them, and I would want to check their pulse to see if they are still with us. So it's okay to acknowledge that you have those biases. You just need to try and put them to one side when you're looking to resolving a conflict. It's also important to continue to do that during the conversation, just to sort of check your attitude and your mindset and make sure that you're really focused on driving the process and serving all of the parties there, rather than kind of building your own narrative of an ideal outcome. I think a conversation that I had with a CEO not so long ago was when he said to me, his brain works a lot quicker than most other people's, so he gets there faster. So it's just better for everybody if he just tells everybody what he thinks is the solution. And I had to explain to him that he may well be far brighter and far quicker than everybody else, and he may well have the perfect solution to this particular crisis, but if you don't bring people to their own conclusions and bring people on the journey with you, they're not going to accept that solution, even if it is the best thing. So that took a lot of coaching, and that can often happen with people that are in positions of power, because they have seen it quite often and they kind of jump to that natural conclusion themselves. So it's important to know that about other people and to know that about yourself. So then we move on to solution-focused conversations. So having this approach teaches us that really when it comes to human issues, we don't always need to fully understand the problem itself to arrive at an ideal solution. So this process that we've been building today really teaches us to trust that if we focus on defining what the situation and the environment and the process looks like once the issue has been successfully removed, we can engage the team on creating the best possible outcome for them and for the team and for ourselves. So a solution-focused conversation can help the parties move away from confrontation and into a more collaborative space where they can build a solution together. So the best approach for getting parties started on this is to begin to build agreement on the characteristics of an ideal solution and how important each of these characteristics are. So does the solution need to be easy to implement? Does it need to be quick to implement? Does it have to be within a particular cost range? Is the future maintenance of this solution important, or is it just something for now? So considering this step will get the different parties working together without the risk of creating a confrontation around a preferred solution. So if possible, we should try and involve more people than just the original parties on this. So that could be other team members, stakeholders, people that are impacted by it. So once we work with the parties to define the characteristics or constraints of the solution, we can then move on to a solution building process by using whatever your preferred solution generation technique is. So that could be brainstorming, ideation techniques, going through a structured problem solving activity, whatever is your preferred tool. And then because the parties have previously worked together to define the main characteristics and constraints of a good outcome, they can then validate potential solutions against those characteristics and constraints in a collaborative manner, rather than looking at them as competing solutions that they have to defend. So with Frank and Steve and the team at large, we needed to find a solution, and there were three parts to that. So the first one was setting up the conflict resolution agreement for the whole team. That was something that was necessary to have that framework, so that we could future-proof ourselves as a team later. But it was also allowing space in the sprint review and the retros to discuss impact. So once there was there was a feeling of, well, we'll just have to work harder next time, or we'll just leave Frank out of it next time. So we changed that to allow that space to discuss impact, and we changed the retros to allow people to contribute asynchronously before the meeting to allow reflection. So something that Frank had brought up was that he often felt overpowered by other people that were really quick with ideas, or really quick with solutions, or really quick to point the finger. We also partnered Frank with another member of the team, and we held quick 30-minute retros with him for a period of a month, so that he could prepare for the retros, because he was finding it quite overwhelming. And then with Steve, we gave him more time for coaching with regards to his use of language. So, to be clear, it wasn't that he was particularly aggressive, or he wasn't, using swear words or unkind language, but he also wasn't being kind. I think he would say that he was being direct when everybody else would say he was being abrupt. Whereas he would say that he was being blunt, other people would say that he was being aggressive. And it was just his way and the language that he was using. And it helped teaching him about I statements and what have you as well. So we gave him a bit of time for coaching. And then the next stage is to then reinforce conflict as an opportunity. So we've done the terms of engagement, and we made sure that we continually embraced conflict, and we thanked people for challenging, and we thanked people for for bringing up concerns in the way that we had agreed. So it's really important to keep using that language that challenges an opportunity. So by doing that, by introducing the terms of engagement and reframing that conflict, we were much better at managing conflict with this team. And it was great because, Frank and Steve, they actually became best friends. And Frank was the best man at Steve's wedding just last week. Not really. But they were able to have a coffee from time to time. And they do still work together as well. They're often put into teams together, and they've found their own rhythm, and they've found their own way of, understanding where the other is coming from and how the other prefers to work. So all of those things that I've talked to you about is all about building that psychological safety, framing conflict as an opportunity, and really getting to the root cause of what's driving that conflict, and then focusing on solutions when it comes to having those conversations. So hopefully I have I've covered off some of the things that you guys wanted to learn. I'm just going to go on to the next slide and have a quick check of the chat as well. If people want to ask questions, that's absolutely fine. I'll ask Helen and Ines to help me with the questions that have come up in the chat. If you're feeling particularly gracious, it would be amazing if you could give me some feedback. I can't call myself a member of the Agile community if I didn't learn and didn't improve each time I do something like this. So if you are feeling gracious and you're not too tired, it would be amazing to get some feedback on what you've learned today, and that would be absolutely amazing. So it's exactly the same with the QR code. You can just hold it up and it's just a quick few questions and a couple of ratings. So that would be amazing. So I'll just have a quick look at the chats now. So Peter said, at Kate, seems like a good alternative would be to ask team members to use the forums. you do X, I feel Y because I need Z. Yeah, Peter. So Peter's put in the chat, seems like a good alternative would be to ask team members to use the full NVC formula of when you do X, I feel Y because I need Z, so can you please do? So naming the need would help the people who are in conflict become more aware of their needs and emotions. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find it really helpful to kind of sort of miss off that when you do X, just because I find that it's a little bit softer to start with an I statement rather than a you statement. But it's like with anything, you know, some people's mannerisms and tones and what have you really lend itself to being quite direct, and with other people perhaps not so much. So it's all about judgment, really. So Ines has put from yes but to yes and, building upon each other's ideas. Yeah, that's a great tool, and I think Paul talks about that in terms of improv and things like that. I've done a bit of improv in my time, and it's a really great way to kind of keep a conversation going and keep a brainstorm going, and you can come up with some really wacky ideas or wacky solutions to problems which are never going to work, but from that gives you a grain in order to temper something down to something really realistic. So yeah, that's great. I love yes and, it's really good fun. Maru, hopefully I've said that correctly, please tell me if I haven't. You got me. It sounded like an anecdote turned into an argument from a management book from the US.
No, I was referring to he became his best man at his wedding.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You got me. That's the kind of inspirational stories turned absolute argument of authority that you cannot argue with, and therefore you have to apply my management method because I just published a book on it.
Well, they didn't, but I think, you know, it's unrealistic to expect that people are, you know, it's all going to be sunshine and roses at the end. You know, sometimes, you know, take the win, and if people can tolerate each other for the period of time they have to work together, that's okay with me. So yeah, Tim said about MVC, non-violent communication. Yeah, definitely, we've talked about that. And then again, if I get the pronunciation wrong, please do correct me. That's absolutely fine. Sus, I think, or Sus, or just Sus maybe. What's your advice if a team member finds an executive difficult to work with? I love it. So let's just clarify the terminology here. So are we talking, when we say executive, do you mean a leader within that team, or do you mean like a CEO? If you're happy to pop it in the chat or come off mute and give us a bit more.
Yeah, so I'll come off mute.
Thank you.
So just thinking about someone in like the executive team who, so I've been in situations where someone is trying to do their work, and one of the executive team is basically advising their own staff to do something in the opposite direction, causing conflict. And so it's kind of because there's a lot of hierarchies in jobs and so on. It's how does that, what's the best way for that to play out in your, I don't know if you've experienced this sort of thing before.
Yeah,
what I'd ask.
Yeah, executives are, I think I gave an example a little bit earlier as well with, the CEO that I was working with, who was a real trickster in terms of, feeling that he had the right solutions, and it was really important to him that those solutions were followed through. So yeah, it can be really frustrating if there's somebody that it feels like they're pulling in a different direction to perhaps where you're trying to lead the team or where you've agreed to lead the team. So I think it kind of boils down to, maybe having that kind of that I statement conversation with them if you feel comfortable, and gathering some facts as to the impact that it had. So perhaps by that executive doing what he or she has done, it may have caused delays, it may have caused additional costs, it may have caused issues within the team, it may have caused confusion. So rather than saying, when you did this, it caused confusion, and and I don't like it, and please stop, reframing that to when this happened, the impact on us was X, which caused Y. So when you pulled in a different direction, the impact it has on us was additional cost or a delay or time issues or difficult conversations that you had to have within the team. And also it made me feel, or I feel that you perhaps don't value what it is that we're doing, or I feel that you don't believe that the solution we have in place is the right one, and I'd like to discuss that. So quite often, especially if it's an executive, they can be sort of slightly removed from the objective of the team, and if you can reframe it that way, then they might be more likely to come on board once they realise what the impact is. And from there, you can build on a solution, which is perhaps that they come to you in the first place, or they discuss the solutions that they were thinking of, and you can incorporate that into the next sprint, perhaps, or maybe invite them as a potential stakeholder to whatever's the next show and tell or whatever it is, so that they can see firsthand what it is that you guys are achieving. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you.
Kate, we actually have a question from Manwan, and that's do you find that this method works for all cultures?
Yeah, and I think there's a follow-up as well about folks that are neurodivergent as well. Now, I can't profess to be an expert in all cultures, or in people that are neurodivergent. However, I do have experience of diverse cultures, and also one of my clients is in a scientific field, and that's actually attracted people that are neurodivergent too. So the behaviours that they were showing, if I start with the neurodivergent one, the behaviours they were showing were, really needing quite a lot of structure. They needed, for these particular workers, they needed to be able to work asynchronously. They needed to, in order to bring their best selves to work, they needed very clear goals. So for us, we spent more time in the planning stages, and in the stage of establishing those terms of engagement. So that was really great for me, because I was able to learn a lot more about how they wanted to work and how I worked. And we were able to establish some shared agreements as to how things would be brought up. And that was really important for them, to know where they stood at all times and what was going to be expected, and having that structure. Now, I can't say that that's the same for all people that are neurodivergent. People are on different scales, but it's important to allow people to be able to voice how they best work, and see if you can find a flexible solution for that. And I would say the same for different cultures too. Looking at the terms of engagement, and looking at their preferred ways of working, and kind of use of language, and also different quite often with different cultures, there's different flexibilities that are needed in terms of being able to work more flexibly. So asynchronous working becomes more important, and as a leader of that particular team, I might want to be a little bit more structured in terms of having a Miro board and a lot more opportunities for people to share and collaborate. I also am more present as well. So where people perhaps need a bit more structure, I try and be more present for them to be able to facilitate. So that's something that yeah, so that's something that I do. And yeah, you're absolutely right, it is neurodiverse. I don't know why I said was that me that said neurodivergent? It's because I was looking at the chat. It is neurodiverse.
Yes, I correctly, sorry about that. I was
looking at it and I just said exactly the same thing. Yeah, neurodiverse, you're absolutely right, apologies.
May I actually ask a follow-up because of all the cultures? So I found that because I work with a lot of cultures around the world, and I found that non-Western cultures, and I have to be very specific, non-Western cultures, some of these approaches doesn't work. Like I feel messages, they don't talk about that. It's a taboo, they don't.
Yeah.
There's no way you can get them to open up and say something like this, which of course I try to beat them over the head. Is like, if you actually say what you want, it's so much easier to get what you want instead of implying and hoping. But that's just not the way that they do things. So I'm wondering if there are other, tactics that may perhaps work better.
Yeah, and that might be the case in terms of establishing those terms of engagement. It might be that the team agrees that they are comfortable with having that more blunt approach. One of the things that I've done in the past is I think it was on a Miro board. I put apologies if people aren't familiar with Miro. It's a virtual whiteboard, but I put a place to one side that allowed people to park frustrations. So we had a rule where people weren't able to, people didn't say, Jen, you're frustrating me, you keep stealing my cup or what have you. But we would allow people to put frustrations on there in a broader sense. So people are able to say, it's frustrating me that every time I go to get my mug, somebody keeps stealing it. It's the pink one with hearts all over it. That's fine. Please avoid it. Thank you. It's a silly example, but because of the terms of engagement and because we knew that was something where we could put frustrations up, it allowed people to do that. Now that wouldn't work with everybody, but if you have got that more direct culture, then something like that could work. You have to keep an eye on it, but that's something that I've done in the past, and that's been successful.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Are there any other questions?
Not a question, but I wanted to share with you some of the. I come from a different angle at this systemic coach, and there are some practices about resonance that very much align and overlap with what you were saying. So I found a lot of the thinking and practice that emerged in the past 50 years since the beginning of the 70s align very much with what you were explaining. The NVC, for example, takes a much more self-centered and emotion-focused approach to communication, tries to bypass what I feel comfortable with, what I like, and go straight towards what works, what's most efficient for the system, for the whole group. So it's never a thing that makes everybody say, oh, that's my perfect way of communicating. That's not the intention. But other techniques from resonance discuss values, for example, or beliefs. So, for example, you say, it's just an example. It has an escalation mode. That means you don't lead straightforward with this example I'm going to give. But as an example, you have come 3 times after we have agreed to our appointments late, and the value of punctuality and not waste focusing on the highest value work is very important for me, and I'd like you to take that into account. So what I propose is that next time, if you think you're coming late, please let me know at least half an hour before, but I certainly prefer that you do not come late at all. So that's just one of there is an escalation mode to this. There's several levels before and after, but that's the idea I wanted to share was the resonance led through alignment is the wrong word, sharing and communication of values. Weirdly enough, it works very well with the values thing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, you know, being really mindful of values that a company has, and every company has different values, but being mindful of those values, you know, can sometimes be a shortcut to being able to have a more direct conversation. So if your values are things like, you know, high energy and impact and you know, candor, perhaps, you know, if somebody is behaving in a way that's not aligned to the values, you don't always have to go through all of this whole conflict resolution. If their behaviors aren't in line with the value and you're in a position to be able to have that conversation with somebody, you can catch the chase and have that conversation. But if it's a bit murkier, or perhaps, you know, you can't really establish exactly where or why things are happening, that's why it's important to perhaps go through a solution focused conversation and ask some of those questions that I gave earlier in order to get that resolution. But, you know, values are so important. Company values and individual values are incredibly important. And if people aren't, you know, consistently not aligning with the company values, then, you know, that could be a whole separate conversation.
The reason why I mentioned that is really not about the alignment. Alignment is actually in that model a very dangerous thing, because it leads people to feel like you cut off their available opportunities to act. The weird thing about value-based communication is that people, it dilutes the conflict, because people start developing a certain level of empathy for what causes your actions. And it also leads to a distanciation effect from the actions of someone to his values, and you can start talking about what you want to change, because knowing about somebody's value intent does not excuse their behavior. You will still have the same issue with that. It just helps you start talking with them about how can you find a solution to this. And that's just, it's just you know, the conversation. The solution is a totally different space. And that's why I wanted to share my second contribution. I'm part of a dojo that practices something called solution focused coaching. It's also I think it's a I don't know the name of the famous textbook on this, but it's about 2 decades old, and it really is a thing. It's not just somebody put that on a slide. It's really a whole body of knowledge and practices. And if you want to know more about that, I can send you some links on LinkedIn. I can find you.
That'd be great. Yeah, please do find me on LinkedIn, and yeah, I'd love to read some more about that. So I'm conscious of time. I don't know whether Helen or Ines, I don't want to take up any more of people's evenings or lunch times.
No, that's perfect. I was just actually about to just say as well, we are at time. So thank you. Perfect timing, in fact. Thank you so much.
It's one thing I've got right today.
Yeah. No, it was really, really fantastic. I mean, I took a lot of things away, just even things from bringing a value to each sprint, a different value to each sprint. I thought that was, I know that was quite early on, but I found that quite interesting. It's something that I've actually never thought to do. So yeah, that's a great little sort of tidbit. And also the neutral zone sort of trigger. Like, I know you're saying you think about Switzerland. I just thought that was really great. I use it those things in other areas, I suppose, of my life, but in being able to manage conflict and, you know, maybe an environment that you're not comfortable in is really really helpful. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for your questions and being open and transparent as well with us. And I'm not sure if there was anybody who wanted to have a chat maybe a little bit after with yourself, Kate, or you guys are happy to reach out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm conscious of time. So if people want to reach out on LinkedIn, I would be more than happy to follow up with anybody that's, you know, feeling particularly anxious or conflicted or having to deal with something. I'd be happy to have a chat. So yeah, follow me on LinkedIn, and that I'm happy to extend that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone. It's just, yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.